Okay. Hello, Alaya. How are you?
Hello, good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
So glad to be here.
And you've got a book out called The Library of Broken Worlds. How many books do you have published now?
This is my eighth novel.
Your eighth novel. Okay, wow. Have you been a published writer for your whole life, or did you do something else before?
Basically, I've been a writer my whole life. I was an unpublished writer, and then I was a published writer. But I've always wanted to write novels and short stories.
Okay. Are you able to make a living at your doing your writing?
Um, yes, more or less. It's always complicated being a an artist, especially nowadays. So when it became really too hard for me to make a living as an artist in New York, I decided to leave and I ended up immigrating to Mexico. So I've been living there for the last 10 years. And I'm now living in Oaxaca.
Well, the cost of living is probably cheaper there.
Yeah, it's a lot less. I mean, there's just a lot more ability for artists to make a living and to create. It kind of had Mexico City in particular, when I moved there, really had the vibe of the way people would describe New York in the 70s. Like I'm not old enough to have lived through it, but I mean, I would hear people's stories and I was always kind of jealous that they got to live in a New York that was a little more hospitable to arts. And Mexico City is very much like that.
Oh, well, that's great. So the book that you've got out now is called The Library of Broken Worlds. Interesting title. Why don't you just give us a bit of a synopsis of it and then we can kind of dissect it a little bit.
Yeah. So the Library of Broken Worlds follows Freda, who was born in the library. And the library of this novel is still a repository of human knowledge, but imagining it kind of projected 4,000 years into the future. So there are these massive artificial intelligences that people call material gods, and they have burrowed under the earth of the library, which is its own planet and its own solar system. And they are kind of the collectors of the accumulated human knowledge, and they guard this knowledge. They're also, on the other hand, capable of extreme violence. And so it's kind of like the library meets a nuclear arsenal. And that that place where the gods have tunneled under the earth is a center of justice, of learning. It's a giant, kind of modeled on a giant university town. It has a huge amount of diversity and interest in thought. And my main character was born in the tunnels. The library gods actually made her. And so she's sort of very much part of the library. She's in fact more part of the library than anybody else, but she's also an outsider because people question her humanity because she was created by artificial intelligences. So they call her a secondary AI, and they question whether or not she's an object or a person. And she grows up in this world, and she ends up meeting two outsiders. So people who are from Tierra, which is Earth, and another planet in another solar system. And both of them in their own ways are people who are victims of the great peace that the library has guaranteed for the last 500 years. And so this is how Freda learns that even though there's different kinds of peace, and so that the pieces she herself has been able to grow up in and enjoy is not something that people like Joshua from Tierra or Nergui from her religious minority have been able to really enjoy, because they're still feeling the violence of a system that privileges some people over others. And that's the beginning of Freda's journey to uncovering the truth of the history of the library and of the gods and of her role in the world.
So are these AI gods, are they evil? Are they the bad guys in your story?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
Not at all. I mean, sort of, in the sense, let's say there's a lot of conflict surrounding them, but I always meant for the AI to be an integral part of her world, and actually something that brings a lot of benefits to humanity. So, she's the daughter of the four library gods, in particular one whose name is Yamaya, which is based on the African and diasporic goddess of water. And Yamaya births Freda and loves her, even though they operate at vastly different time scales. And one is material intelligence, the other one is like organic intelligence, sort of. And so but the gods, they have their different personalities, they have different avatars. Their avatars are often in conflict with one another. One doesn't know what the other one is doing. I mean, a lot of issues of kind of like the human psyche writ large, and so yeah, there's conflict, and there's some things that some gods do that aren't terribly conducive to human happiness, but they're by no means black and white. Even the war god, who the frame story is that Freda has left the library and she is telling the story of her life to this war god to try to stop him from killing her. It's very Scheherazade-like. And so even him, that she ends up with a very complex relationship with this god who starts out trying to kill her, so none of them are really the bad guys.
You call them gods. You refer to them as gods. Are human beings supposed to worship them?
Yeah, I love that. So human beings have different approaches to the gods. They're known to be material. So, material means they're made of a substrate understood by humans, right? But they're also very much beyond humans in terms of like their capacity and scope and time scale. So that kind of combination of mystery and being very concrete is a very specific kind of dynamic of that world. And so there's some people who do basically worship them the way you and I would think of as worshiping a god. There are some who respect them, some who, the librarians, for example, resemble in some ways a religious order, but they're very much rooted in the materiality of the gods. So I take a kind of expansive view of religion in this, and some people, they acknowledge the existence of the gods because they exist, but they don't think of them in any kind of godlike or worshipful way, like Nergui, who comes from a religious minority that has a totally different philosophy and focuses on completely different things. So I really wanted to, even though I focus on gods and I call them gods, different people have different approaches to that. And I wanted that to be able to be more reflective of the way humans right now, have different approaches to God and divinity.
If you were to pick two movies that are out that might represent this book, like X meets Y, how do you think you could do that? Or is there anything out there that's even close?
There's elements of what I love in a lot of different movies. Now, I mean, the X meets Y format is always a little challenging for me. Let's see, maybe I'm kind of thinking like the Janelle Mona. I love her as a writer. She has her Dirty Computer, a motion picture. So, it's not a full length movie, but it's pretty brilliant. And the way that she develops the world in that, which is kind of dystopian, but uses a lot of has a lot of interface with the human brains and machines and dreams. And those are things that are very important to the novel. So I would definitely say, certainly in terms of aesthetics or visually, that could definitely be, a touchstone or something that, you could kind of look at. But otherwise, I mean, honestly, a lot of my influences are very literary. I was very much like drawing on Ursula Le Guin, very much like The Left Hand of Darkness, and especially The Dispossessed was like a huge influence on this. And the world building of Octavia Butler, in The Parable of the Sower or Parable of the Talents, like that kind of stuff was very much on my mind. So I don't know about another movie. I mean, I'm sure it exists, but unfortunately I can't think of anything right now.
Well, that's all right. That was kind of a stumper anyways. For some reason, I thought of The Matrix. I don't know why. Is there any?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
It's far future, and then some, humans are like living in their heads in a certain way. So there's definitely, I think that's kind of what I was going with too, with the emotion picture of Dirty Computer, right? Like that. It's not a dystopian. Both of those are very much dystopian. This is not. This is what I would call a complicated utopia. In the many ways, the world in which Freda lives is much kinder and a much better place to live than any city currently on Earth. But in a lot of other ways, it has different ways of interacting with reality. It has different ways of processing information. I mean, even though I have this distinction between artificial intelligence and organic intelligence, in fact, almost all humans that Freda encounters, including herself, have significant modifications to their brains that allow them to communicate to one another directly via their brains to share avatars with one another that literally, interact with the world in front of them, but aren't actually there. And like, there's all sorts of stuff that I think very much is drawing on that kind of science fictional imagery of like what's real, what isn't, how do you interact with virtual spaces while you're still in physical spaces. Yeah, for sure.
On your bio, it says that you were working on this for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So why did it take so long?
It's funny because on the one hand, it seems like so long ago, but on the other hand, it seems like exactly the amount of time that the novel needed. Like this is good. Part of that is I just seem to be getting slower as I get older. So we'll see what the next one brings. But I think, the real reason why is because I'm getting more ambitious, and I have ideas that need time to fully gel. And I feel that the story I was telling, Freda's story, I lived with her for so long, and I felt that it was really important to me to get her story right, not just okay, and a lot of that took time. It took time because I would write a draft. Then I was working on Trouble of the Saints at the same time, and when I wrote the first draft of this, so I would go and edit because I was much further along with Trouble of the Saints. So I would go back and I would edit that, and then I would maybe leave this for 7 months or even a little longer, and then I would come back to it, and that would be when I needed to revise, and I was kind of polishing it. Then I took another break. Then I came back. At that point, I realized, a lot of the, with the help of my wonderful editors at Scholastic, that a lot of the world building was, while it was still pretty dense, it actually needed much more. I needed to have a much more robust sense of the world. And so that was actually, I would say, it was about 6 months of a very thoroughly re-examining and going through every detail of the world building, including the monetary system and the legal system and how appeals processes worked, and literally, like, what does a tribunal of judges look like? And I came up with this idea that I kind of love, which is that they have 3 representatives. One is the representative of the past, the other is of the future, and the other one is of the present. And so these kind of incarnate the interests of those living in the past, present, and future. And those are the ones who judge the validity of the court cases that are heard in the story. So I was doing all sorts of stuff like that and stuff that really excited me. And it just took a long time to develop. And then I had to go back and incorporate it into my rewrite, which eventually meant throwing out 80% of the novel and writing it again, which was hard and took a long time. So that's kind of, just the process, basically.
Okay. We got to wind this down. We just run out of time. Is the book out now?
Yeah, it's out on June 6th. So yeah, wherever books are sold, your local bookstore, online, your local library. I know not everyone has money to spend on books these days, but it's always so wonderful to recommend books to your local library.
Okay, last question. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, it's AlayaDawnJohnson.com. You can find everything about me and the books there, my social media, and my Substack.
Okay. Well, Alaya, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was nice talking to you. And
thank you so much, Douglas. This was great.
Best of luck with the book launch.
Thank you.